All right. Well, hi, and welcome to Controlling the Abyss, designing Uncharted's controls for the PlayStation Vita. My name is Ron Allen, and I'm one of the senior designers at the Ben Studio. For those who are not familiar with us, we are the guys behind the Siphon Filter series, as well as Resistance Retribution, and now Uncharted Golden Abyss. Here's a quick overview on what we'll go over today, showing you guys some of the problems that we encountered and the lessons that we have learned developing them. You know, it was both a blessing and a curse to work on an Uncharted game. I'm sure you guys can imagine, no pressure, right? We obviously didn't want to screw anything up, but at the same time, we still wanted to be innovative. I mean, the Vita has a multi-touch front screen, multi-touch rear, which honestly is completely new and a little frightening. It's got front and rear cameras, gyro controls, and something that's normally taken for granted. You have guaranteed attention to your controls. You're not staring at a TV, right, while your controller's in your lap. You're actually looking at the controls. So you can do a lot of unique things because of this. And overall, I'd say the best thing, by far, at least to me, is the two analog sticks on a handheld, right? Plus all the conventional buttons and the touchscreen. You know, we're missing a few buttons, at least from the DualShock 3, but you know what? The touchscreen more than makes up for them. As we only have a short time here today, I figured we'll go over some of the Vita-specific controls in Golden Abyss rather than any of the traditional controls that are transitioned over from Uncharted. So, I'll start with our climbing system. We knew we wanted to do something intuitive with climbing, but what does that mean? Do we do, you know, drag your character's limbs onto an edge and then grab his foot and drag it to another one so he can, you know, get a foothold so he can actually reach to a larger edge, you know, more like real rock climbing? Do we do directional swipes and, you know, which direction we want him to climb? Well, we knew we needed it to be simple, so we created a system where you touch the environment and wherever you touched, Drake would climb there. I mean, this worked well, but once we did the more dramatic cameras, like pull the camera back a little bit, we noticed a slight issue. You could tap an edge way off in the distance, and Drake would climb there. We can touch and wait, go grab coffee, wait, Drake's still climbing, right? The game's playing itself. So we knew we needed to add a radius around the player, and anything inside that radius was valid. We even added modifiers allowing you to tilt the system, and Drake would lean out, and then we'd move the radius out, so now you can reach these farther edges. Did this work? Yeah. But you know, something didn't feel right. There was no feedback. Why does this edge work and not that one? You know, when you make a mechanic that calls for you to touch something, and you touch that something and nothing happens, the game feels like it's broken. So what do? Do we put hand icons everywhere on every edge that's valid? I mean, that's not Uncharted, right? What could we do that was Uncharted? So using the concept of the flashing gun pickups, we decided to make our edge flash when you touch them. I mean, it was subtle. You just touched the edge and it would fade in and out, showing you that you touched it. I mean, this worked really, really well for us. We got feedback, everything works, we're done, right? Nah, something was wrong. There's repetition. You would constantly tap edges over and over and over and over. It ended up feeling more like a rhythm game than an Uncharted game, right? Funny enough, stemming from a bug that we had that stored touch inputs, the paint your path idea was born. This was the epiphany, honestly, that we needed to make it feel good when you did the touch climbing. So once we got it in the game, you could take your finger and you could draw a path on screen, lighting up each edge in succession as you go. It felt really, really good to us. We still kept leaning the system to reach those far edges, but with this painting the path technique, we finally had something that we were proud of and ended up shipping with. So next up is our melee system, you know, which was an interesting ride for us in the development. At the start, you know, we pitched a melee system that was extremely unique. I mean, it allowed you to touch any area on an enemy's body, and you'll attack that particular location. And that would cause a particular reaction animation, and depending on that reaction, it would open up a whole new branch of attacks that you can do. So think about you hit someone in the stomach and they buckle over, and now you can hit them in the back or the side of the head or sweep the legs. Or if you hit them in the face, they'll be knocked back. But as I'm sure you can imagine, this was way too heavy in animations and code. Even trying to simplify the design down to 4 different attack areas, like the head, the body, and both the legs, it produced entirely way too much content. Besides, Uncharted's not Tekken, right? So what's the next step? So we decided to do a similar system to Uncharted 2. This means you can attack the enemy a few times and you may get reversed, and if you do, you have to dodge it and return fire. We did this, but by touching an enemy, you could choose who you wanted to attack. So now we had tapping the enemy to attack, swipes for reversals, and then we had a finishing move. I mean, it worked well, but we ended up tapping the screen constantly without actually attacking anyone. Why? What the hell was going on? Well, it's that whole feedback thing again, right? We only allowed melee when you were within a certain radius of an enemy, and there was no real visual feedback to tell you when you were within that radius. So the first solution, simple, we added a melee icon over the enemy. We even made this icon pickable, so when the enemy's off screen, just behind you, you can tap this icon and you'll turn around and you'll still attack the guy. It totally worked, but enemies don't just stand there, they move around. So that icon moves with the enemy. So you can imagine us chasing this icon down on screen. It's just not fun. It's not exactly what we intended. But at the same time, funny enough, we were designing this bar on the right side of the screen that displayed icons contextually, and this melee icon was a perfect fit. So we added another melee icon inside this bar, and we put it just to the left of the right analog stick, which is most likely where your finger's going to be when you're in combat. You're basically moving the right analog stick to control the camera. So we did this for extreme quick access, right? So now you could choose your target by touching him, or tap the icon bar to attack the closest attacker, or actually press the square button as well. Finally, we had a system that mimicked the Uncharted experience while still being unique with touch gameplay. Well, next up is our CANOE. From early prototypes, we knew that we needed to add mechanics to break up the normal running and gunning. The CANOE was a perfect fit because it was a beautiful set piece that screamed out for touch mechanics. So we started off, again, with something extremely simple. You row on the right side of the CANOE, and you'll turn over to the left. You row on the left, you'll turn to the right. And then you just cycle back and forth, and it'll guide you down the river. We started with just rear touch. You're swiping on the sides of the rear panel, but there was a disconnect. You wanted to swipe into the water like you were really rowing, so we allowed both front and rear. I mean, it sounds fine, right? Well, yeah, until you had turns into the river. Since there were no real mechanics to help us turn faster, we ended up constantly running into the walls, and you had to dig yourself out. Think about not like a 3-point turn, think more about like a 10-point turn. I mean, it was ridiculous. So we added some mechanics to help us turn faster. We did the length of the swipe as well as the speed of the swipe. It means you turn faster. So, you know, the faster and longer you do, the harder you'll make a turn. I mean, it made total sense to us until we couldn't play the animations on the character fast enough. We felt ourselves swiping quite often. So no matter how fast we play the animation, we would never be able to get the one-to-one correlation between the swipe and the animation. So you would end up swiping literally a ton more times than the actual motion. If we throw away those swipes, you know, players might not feel like it's responsive enough. And if we stored them, it's definitely going to feel like a bug. So it was getting apparent we needed to do something else, and rather quickly. So how about add another layer of complexity? That always works, right? We decided to add angles into the mix. So if you swipe to the side, it'll be a much harder turn. If you swipe down, it'll be a longer, straighter turn. We even combine that with the length and the speed swipes, giving you even more control, and more control is better, right? No. As I'm sure you can all imagine, it was getting way overcomplicated and no longer fun. I mean, we ended up creating a way now to run into the walls faster and harder. So that 10-point turn became even more crazy. So all in all, we lost the original idea of it being a fun break from the norm. So simplifying the concept down to just being on a path and moving forward and backward literally solved every issue we had. It may sound dull, but now you can add cool events where like the current is pulling you into a waterfall and you have to row in the opposite direction to get away. We even added combat sequences, and there was no way it would be fun to do combat while you're trying to dig yourself out of a wall. It just wouldn't work. This sequence honestly was on the chopping block for us for quite a long time. And by simplifying it, we turned it into something that we loved, all of us loved, and we ended up shipping with. Gyro aiming. From the first mechanic pitches, I mean, we knew that we wanted to do something with the gyro because, in all honesty, that gyro was more accurate than it was on the 6-axis, the PS3 DualShock controller. So we started with an SLR camera type system. where you point the system in the physical space and it, you know, the in-game space would be affected. We had full 360-degree tilting system feeling, you know, similar to a camera. You can do landscape and portrait pictures. But the problem is that at the time we were having a ton of drift and accuracy issues, not to mention that it was a little overwhelming to be doing this crazy stuff with the system and then all of a sudden you're back and you have to settle down and do normal gameplay. It just didn't feel right. Well, with the drift and accuracy getting better with iteration, obviously, something still didn't feel right. And we realized that we didn't need that full 360-degree range, since it literally distracted from the game. So we locked to landscape. We also adjusted the speed and sensitivity when you were zoomed in to make it much, much smoother, as well as resetting the accelerometer every time the system was settled. Now we had something that felt great and can be used in bed, right? When you're playing like this, it's actually now, every time we reset the accelerometer, this is where you're looking, dead center in the screen. So it just worked much, much better. It just wasn't consistent because, you know, we had a sniper rifle in the game using almost the same tech, but do we really want to add gyro aiming to a sniper? Really? Well, I mean, it worked. We loved it. We thought it felt really, really good. So, and it made sense. But once we got this in, we all loved it. But we knew we needed to come up with some sort of hybrid aiming system, one that allowed the right stick to be used in conjunction with the 6-axis, or on its own. Other games use a similar technique, but we didn't like it. I mean, I remember, Ocarina of Time did a good job at this, but it was extremely twitchy to us, and it felt like you were fighting between each other. And we wanted it to be much, much smoother, work together. And I think we did a really good job of making it work together, but, I mean, honestly, it's still not consistent. Why does this style of aiming work with one weapon and not another? Are we really thinking of making this gyro aim work with everything? That is absolutely nuts. I mean, everyone's going to hate it. Well, we ended up adapting the gyro system in general to the aiming system. And to make this work, we tweaked the system to only allow fine adjustments rather than full gyro control like the sniper rifle or the SLR camera. So unless the system was juked hard, like really hard, you might not even know it was there. We ended up calling this into aim. The idea was that you aim the right stick and get close to your target and then move the system to do a quick adjustment and then boom, headshot. I mean, the awesome thing about this system is that in the beginning, we had quite a few people in our studio that were complaining. They're like, no way, this sucks, whatever, right? But after a few weeks of it being playable, it was awesome when there was this firmware update that broke the gyro. And everyone started complaining. They're all pissed off that they thought we cut this feature. At that point, we knew that we did the right thing. And honestly, I'm such an advocate of this system, and I hope and wish more games use this technique going forward. I mean, I know this might sound like a bold statement, but in my opinion, we need to bridge the gap between the mouse and the controller. And I think this is it's not the key, but it's the large step in that direction. So what did we learn? Well, based off the way you hold pretty much any touchscreen device, there are these areas that we found to be the quick access areas. I mean, these are the easiest areas for your thumbs to get to quickly, like really quickly. When you're holding your thumbs, boom, right there. On the Vita, we don't consider the top portion as quick access area, strictly because when you're holding the analog sticks down, it takes way more work to stretch your thumbs up than it does down. We have dubbed the rest of that front screen as the better be worth it area. And this is because, most likely you have to take your hand off the side of the controller to reach inside of the screen. We really only use this for the most part for non-combat related stuff, although we did use this for aiming grenades. And the trade-off for reaching in to the screen was precise and fast aiming. So you no longer have to hold a button, aim the right stick into something. Basically, all you have to do is touch the grenade icon, drag it into the screen. As soon as you let it go, it throws the grenade exactly where you had it. There are some areas on the front touchscreen we like to call the sausage finger areas. These literally are areas you will touch on accident if you use the analog sticks, the square button, or the right D-pad button. We spent lots of time trying to figure out some random acts of gameplay, or at least what we thought were random acts of gameplay, and these areas were almost the culprit. And there was one area actually, or time in the game when Drake was climbing all of these edges and we didn't know what the hell was going on. And remember I was saying earlier about adding the flashing edges? That's when we finally knew, oh crap, my thumb is hitting this thing when I'm hitting the square button. So completely opposite of the front touch is on the rear. The front touch quick access areas are what we call the accidental access areas. You can't really hold these or hold this system at all naturally without touching these areas unless you have like literally tiny like baby hands, right? We only use rear mechanics for on and off, or the rear touch for on and off mechanics, as opposed to the always on. And for instance, I mean, when you jump onto a rope in our game, that's when we look for the rear touch. And what we did with the rear touch is we simulated real rope climbing. So if you climb a rope, hand over hand, that's how you're swiping on the back of the screen. We've dubbed the rest of that touch panel the Stranger Zone, and the only reason we call it that is because it is so new and unique that, you know, anything new normally feels strange. We originally had our zoom in and out there by literally pinching and pulling, as well as on the front screen. Not the normal pinch to zoom like this, although it did work more when you're holding, you can do it with your thumbs. I mean, it worked so well. I mean, it was awesome, but it was so odd that everyone was like, whoa, that's just weird. Even our focus testers didn't like it, and we ended up shipping or scrapping that whole system for something else that, in my opinion, wasn't as intuitive. But I do admit, you know, when I was telling people at events like E3, saying, hey, you gotta reach in and pull out to zoom, their faces were a little like, huh? Like, Anyway, if you could probably find some YouTube videos of me doing this. That was probably pretty funny. So going forward, what would we do? Well, we cut back on some of the kitchen sink touch controls and put more focus on creating a better Uncharted experience. I mean, we were a launch title for the Vita. We did a lot of controls that may or may not have been necessary, but we were, again, trying to show off what the power of the system can do, and I think we did an awesome job at that. We would still offer some alternate touch controls, like touch climbing, but maybe work a choice into the beginning of the game to see if the player wanted to use them or not. And now that we're more familiar with this system, you know, we would use its strengths definitely to create a way more unique experience. Puzzles, just all kinds of stuff. Let me explain that for a minute. I mean, you think that this is our second generation. We no longer have to create the engine from scratch like we did before. So now we can focus on everything else other than, you know, the rendering and that kind of stuff. Advice? Yeah. Well, simplify your designs. That's like the biggest thing, right? If you guys think your controls are, you know, a little too complicated, they are. I mean, you know that. You guys will know that. Just simplify them. You will. There's too simple and there's too crazy. So you just got to find that fine line. The quick access areas in your touch devices in general, right? Even the iPhone. You know, it's very, very important and should be taken advantage of. The touch, the 6-axis, the rear touch controls, they should not be your enemy. But just make sure that they're there for a reason and not just for the sake of putting them there, right? Yeah, the system has it. You don't have to put stuff in just because the system has it. And when designing your controls, seriously try to guesstimate where your player's hands are going to be. It just makes everything feel way, way more natural. And that pretty much wraps it up. Any questions?